Exposure for a narcissist is never just an uncomfortable moment. It's more like a blinding spotlight, ripping them out of a carefully staged performance. In an instant, not only does the mask fall, but the entire stage they built their power and significance upon collapses with it. It's like an actor who has been playing the lead role for decades, only to suddenly hear a voice from the audience shout, "We can see this is just a play." In that moment, not only does the character fall apart, but so does the magic that held the audience under its spell. Carl Jung wrote that every person must eventually confront their shadow, those hidden parts of the self we suppress, deny, and fear to acknowledge. For most people, that confrontation, while painful, can open the door to growth and maturity. But the narcissist avoids it at all costs. Their shadow is filled with vulnerability, emptiness, and the terror of being nobody. Instead of integrating these parts, they hide them behind a grand persona, a mask of confidence and superiority that survives only through recognition from others. And exposure becomes the very moment when that mask is ripped away and the shadow breaks through to the surface. It's not a voluntary step towards self-discovery. It's a forced unveiling of everything they've been trying to bury their entire life. For them, it feels like the collapse of an inner fortress, one whose walls were held up only by the gaze and admiration of others. That's why exposure is not felt as debate or criticism, but as a personal catastrophe. It's the moment when another person's words turn into a mirror, and in that mirror, the narcissist sees not their grand persona, but the truth they've been running from. And this mirror is merciless. It doesn't reflect strength, certainty, or perfection. It reflects weakness, fear, and chaos, all hidden behind the facade. And that is what makes exposure so unbearable for the narcissist. It destroys the illusion without which their fragile sense of self cannot survive. To understand why exposure feels so devastating, we first need to look at their dependence on admiration. For the narcissist, praise is not luxury, it's survival. The entire life of a narcissist is built on external validation. Their inner self is too fragile to stand on its own, so they live in a constant search for reflections in the eyes of others. They only feel real when someone admires them, confirms their importance, or acknowledges their uniqueness. Without that external recognition, it's as if they dissolve. Their existence loses weight. Carl Jung wrote that a person without a solid inner core seeks confirmation of the self in the people around them. For the narcissist, this becomes the only way to exist. They're like an actor who only feels alive when they hear the applause of the audience. The moment silence fills the room, anxiety rises, fear takes over, and the emptiness creeps in. For the narcissist, admiration is not just a pleasant bonus. It's air, applause, praise, likes on social media, envious glances from colleagues, or words of admiration from a partner. All of it becomes their fuel. And the more they receive, the greater their sense of importance grows. But imagine the moment when, instead of applause, there is silence, or worse, exposure. Instead of the usual admiration, they are confronted with cold truth. Their words are not unquestionable. Their victories are exaggerated. Their image is nothing more than a mask. For the narcissist, this feels like a blow straight to the heart. In relationships, it shows up when their partner begins to notice contradictions, to point out lies, to highlight inconsistencies. Where the narcissist once expected admiration and recognition of their uniqueness, doubt suddenly appears. And for them, that's catastrophic, because the partner stops being the mirror that reflects their supposed perfection. In the workplace, the same pattern plays out. A narcissistic boss may thrive on employees admiring their ideas and charisma. But the moment someone calmly says, "Your strategy didn't work, here's the mistake," the entire system begins to collapse. They expected praise, but instead they're met with truth. A truth that destroys the illusion of being flawless. Exposure breaks the flow of admiration. Where there should have been applause, there is silence and a clear-eyed gaze. For the narcissist, this is not just a disappointment. It feels like a direct threat to their very existence. And this is why exposure cuts so deeply. It robs them of their main resource, admiration. Without it, their persona begins to crack and fall apart. Next is the fear of reality itself. The dread of being seen not as flawless and powerful, but as human, fragile, and imperfect. Behind the facade of grandeur, there is always fragility. On the outside, the narcissist may look confident, polished, almost unshakable. But peel back that glossy exterior, and a very different picture emerges. Imperfections, mistakes, weaknesses, all the things they desperately try to hide. Exposure rips away the cover and brings into the open what they've been concealing, not only from others, but even from themselves. Carl Jung wrote that a person who refuses to face their shadow spends their life building illusions just to avoid seeing it. For the narcissist, that shadow is made of vulnerability and a deep sense of insignificance. They dread admitting they are not all-powerful, that they have limits, flaws, and shortcomings. This is why being exposed is not a small inconvenience for them. It is the moment their shadow stands in front of them, undeniable and overwhelming. For most people, acknowledging mistakes can be part of growth. An error at work might be a chance to learn. A conflict in a relationship can become an opportunity for an honest conversation that strengthens the bond. But for the narcissist, things are different. Their mask must stay flawless. If someone notices even the smallest crack, it is not a chance to grow. It is felt as disaster, a direct threat to their very existence. Picture a magician on stage. As long as the audience believes in the tricks, he appears almost supernatural, someone with secret powers. But the moment someone spots the hidden wire or the mechanism behind the illusion, the magic is gone. Exposure for the narcissist feels exactly like that. What once looked like power suddenly becomes a cheap trick, and instead of admiration, all that's left is the cold gaze of reality. This becomes especially clear in relationships. Imagine a narcissist insisting that they are always right, always superior, always the one who knows best. But then, one day, their partner calmly points out, "You made a mistake, and it's obvious." For most people, that would be embarrassing, but manageable. For the narcissist, it's devastating. Their role is to be infallible, and reality has just torn that script apart. In the workplace, the pattern is the same. A narcissistic manager carefully maintains the image of the perfect leader who always makes the right call. But the moment a colleague highlights an error in their plan or points out an inconsistency between their words and actions, the illusion cracks. What could be a minor correction for someone else feels like catastrophe to them. Because the myth of absolute competence, the very myth they depend on, has just collapsed. This is why reality terrifies them. It strips away the illusion of omnipotence and reminds them of a truth they cannot accept. That beneath the mask, they are just as fallible as anyone else. Exposure becomes a mirror they cannot escape, showing that behind the posture of confidence lies fragility, and behind the image of strength lies weakness. And perhaps the deepest wound of all is the fear of rejection, the terror of no longer being seen as special, needed, or significant. For a narcissist, the most painful wound isn't criticism, and it isn't conflict. It's rejection. When you see them without their mask and call out what's been hiding behind the facade, you are not simply pointing out a flaw. You are rejecting the carefully crafted image they've built. For the narcissist, this isn't just awkwardness or discomfort. It feels like the death of the ego, as if the very foundation of their existence has collapsed in an instant. Carl Jung wrote that every person seeks affirmation of the self in the eyes of others. But a mature personality can still rely on an inner core. The narcissist lacks that core. They exist only through reflection, through admiration, recognition, and external validation. And when that reflection disappears, when someone looks past the mask and calmly says, "I see what's behind it," the narcissist experiences it as the ultimate rejection of their very being. You can see this play out clearly in relationships. A narcissistic partner might be used to hearing constant praise, gratitude, and acknowledgement of their importance. But then, one day, their partner says, "You're not being honest," or "Your actions don't match your words." In that moment, the narcissist feels stripped of the role of being special. They are no longer the center of your world. For them, this isn't simple criticism. It feels like betrayal. They don't interpret it as a judgment of behavior, but as rejection of the self. In social settings, the pattern is the same. Imagine someone who thrives on being the life of the party. Everyone laughs at their stories, hangs on their every word, and admires their charm. But then, someone openly says, "You're exaggerating," or "That's not entirely true." The room falls silent. For most people, this would be embarrassing, but manageable. They might laugh it off or move on. For the narcissist, however, it lands like a crushing blow. They feel stripped of their role as the admired one, and to them, that silence is unbearable rejection. In the workplace, exposure can be even more devastating. Picture a narcissistic boss who carefully maintains the image of a flawless, visionary leader. Then a colleague calmly points out a mistake in their strategy or highlights a contradiction in their statements. For most leaders, this could be an opportunity to adjust and grow. For the narcissist, it is catastrophic. The message they hear is not, "You made an error," but "You are not special." In their worldview, admitting a mistake equals losing status, losing respect, losing everything. This is why exposure triggers such panic. It tears apart the fragile fabric their life is woven from. The illusion of being chosen, the constant need to be at the center, the reassurance of being indispensable. When you stop playing along with their performance, they don't just see it as pushback. They experience it as rejection. And rejection for them is not simply the loss of attention. It is the threat of disappearing. In their perception, you are taking away not only their power and significance, but the very basis of their existence. That is why exposure becomes such a painful event. It reveals their deepest fear, the fear of being nobody and of being left in complete isolation. Exposing a narcissist is never just painful for them, it is devastating. It strikes at the three pillars that hold up their entire sense of self. The first pillar is admiration. A narcissist feels alive only when others validate their importance, when they are applauded, praised, admired as someone special. But exposure cuts off that supply. Where once there was applause, now comes cold truth. And instead of feeling powerful, they are confronted with emptiness. The second pillar is the illusion of perfection. The mask they have built and polished for years must remain flawless at all costs. Exposure tears that mask away. It shines a light on their weaknesses, their mistakes, their contradictions. For most people, admitting imperfections can be a step toward growth and maturity. But for the narcissist, it is disaster. Without the mask, the entire structure of their identity begins to collapse. The third pillar is the need to feel indispensable. Nothing terrifies the narcissist more than the thought of being unnecessary, forgotten, or dismissed. When you see them without the mask, sans mask, and calmly say, "I don't believe in your image anymore," "You don't control me." It feels to them like the death of the ego. It is not just the loss of attention. It is the threat of disappearing, because their self exists only in the eyes of others. It's no surprise, then, that their reaction is so intense. Anger, accusations, dramatic scenes, tears, or even silence. All of it is just different forms of the same defense. And behind those defenses is not strength, but fear. Fear of the void. Fear of being nothing. Fear of losing control over others. Picture someone who has spent years pulling the strings of a marionette, watching it move exactly as they command. Then one day, the puppet stops responding, and the audience suddenly sees the hand that was pulling the strings all along. In that moment, not only does the performance collapse, but so does the illusion of control. That is exactly what happens to the narcissist in the moment of exposure. They are no longer the puppeteer, but simply a person who has lost their power. Carl Jung wrote that no one can become whole without facing their own shadow. But for the narcissist, exposure is not a path toward growth. It is a forced collision with the shadow they've been running from all their life. Their furious protests and desperate reactions are proof of one thing only: that the truth has struck their most vulnerable place. And the more fiercely they resist that truth, the clearer it becomes. You have touched their deepest fear, the one they will never admit out loud. The fear of being no one.